So we will get to that. This is 90 minutes, and I teach this class. I like to teach this class with you and your whole organization for like 6 months. I'm Barb Horn, and I work for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I'm a water resource specialist, and I'm doing this with Danielle Donkersloot, who is an excellent volunteer monitoring program. She's going to introduce more about herself later as a consultant. She is also available to teach study design and no study design. And there's a lot of ways to do it. You don't always have that kind of time to do, but it's so important that the case I'm going to make is that you take that amount of time. We're also being joined by a lot of people in the webinar, and I'm not sort of used to doing both of these. So that's when Candace is not really in sort of this timeout down here. She's talking to the webinar people. Let's see. So I just want to get a quick sense of, raise your hand if you have a current monitoring program. That's the majority of the people in the room, and we can get some stats from the web there. How many are a service provider to groups? So an EPA could be a service provider, because many groups do both. Okay. And how many want to start a program besides you, but you haven't? Okay. What we're doing here is all of that. Those of you that actually are starting a program might be in a better place than, say, Nick, who's got to figure out what they were doing for 25 years, and or maybe not. It's hard to say. All right. So what you have in front of you is an expert, really super expert of this workbook I do have, but it's to keep you engaged and to actually learn something here and not have me talk at you. And I do want, if you don't have a monitoring question, does anybody not have a monitoring question? Folks on the webinar, you want to come up with a monitoring question. Hopefully you have the worksheet that you're going to work through the exercise today. Go ahead. See what I got up there. So these are all the things I've been involved with in my 30 career, and I don't put it up here again to brag or anything. I put it up here to say, when I started my program 30 years ago, there was no one around to help. Often you feel alone. I didn't know what I was doing, and I reached out, and I became involved in all of these things, and I learned everything I know from working with other people and attending things like this. And I feel like it's my job and commitment and passion to give back what I have learned. I'm sharing with you what I know up here. There's nothing about me being up here that says I'm an expert or that Danielle is an expert. I'm just sharing what I've learned and know, and you guys are all experts in this room, and I would encourage you to take if it fits, great, not twist it, do whatever you want, and stay in touch with others. We build this community together. So there's nothing about what I'm saying that's gospel. And please don't take it that way at all. We are all gurus, in my opinion. This is just what I've learned literally over 30 years working at a local scale, a state scale, a regional scale, and a national scale, and I feel like it fits. And there's many people who've contributed to this workbook that you can sign up and get, including River Watch Network. If you guys remember that group back in New England area, who merged with River Network at some point. There's staff involved with that created all of this. Julie Vastine, who actually was going to come and do this workshop at Alarm, and couldn't come, and I'm actually doing it in her place. So there's a lot of the leaders around the country who have put their thought into what we're presenting here. Okay. So now this table mirrors, on the screen now, mirrors the table that's the next thing on your worksheet. And this is what I want you to jot down. With that monitoring question that you asked, don't worry about being right or wrong. There's no such thing as right or wrong in this work. I want you to fill in these columns. I'm going to give you just a minute. What is your study purpose with that question? What is your management decision? Like, if you got that data, what would you be using it for? For a 305B report? To shut down a plant? To implement BMPs? What would you be using that data for? Who would be using it? And there can be more than one answer. What information might those users need to do what you want them to do? And make it up if you don't know. And then what you want to happen. What's the result and outcome on impact? Which I abbreviate as ROI, that you want to happen as a result of the other columns being filled in. I feel all those people on the webinar writing this stuff down. If you have a question, go ahead and type it in, and we'll get it answered for you, hopefully. And if you're confused about one of those headers, just circle it, and believe me, by the time we're done, you won't be. I know I'm making you do this fast because we're a little behind, but hopefully it's easy to jot those down. Another 30 seconds. We're going to come back to this and see what you put down based on what we learned. Okay. You can keep following the worksheet. They'll match some of the slides that I have up here. You're going to get a copy of this presentation. Hopefully the one you get will open as well. So you don't have to jot this stuff down, but I know some people learn by writing. I do. So in my work, at all these levels for 30 years, these are the common problems. We heard these last night in the volunteer monitoring meeting. Recruitment intention, I'm not going to really talk about that today, but the data the plethora of data we generate is not used, and if we were consistently supported, last night there was at least a dozen or more groups that were around 25 years or longer, and I bet one of the reasons they're around is they've had a consistent set of what groups can do if foundations would support you longer than just seed money. We could change the world, right? Next, please. And agencies challenges, this is what I've heard. I'm a state agency. I work for Parks and Wildlife, and I work a lot with the Clean Water Act agencies. This is what I hear why they won't work with volunteer monitoring groups or citizen science groups. You know, there's a communication barrier. They're not communicating the right things at the right time. There's biases and beliefs on both sides. And then they also don't have the resources and capacity. They want to do the right thing, but I know, like in Colorado, when we were giving them data, they felt like it was just more work to do. And they were already underpaid and underloved. And it's not that they didn't want to do the right thing. It's overwhelming. So they also have limited capacity, and they also have a certain mission. And the other thing that I really, really want you to appreciate, especially like people who are service providers, if you're working towards Clean Water Act stuff, every state agency that has the Clean Water Act, their study design, 90% of it is done for them. It's done for them. Those columns you just filled out, it's done for them. They're told what all of that is. So that's the confusion point when they then want to work with the community group. They don't realize what it is they need to communicate because you start from scratch. You don't know their study design, and that's done, and they don't know that they need to tell you. Does that make sense? That's one big, huge miscommunication loop. Okay, so based on this, these are other reasons. If I look deeper into why citizen groups data isn't used and all that, we're just going to whip through these. First, this is the big one. This is a really big one. That monitoring is the end. Especially those of you that start out with, we're going to do education and we're going to do it by taking people out to get data. Now they generate data and holy cow, guess what? They want to do something with that data, but we didn't think about it. The monitoring was the end. And then now the agency will use it. Well, the agency will use it because you didn't include them and consider what their information needs were. And now you're in a power struggle. Monitoring should never be the end. It's a means to the end. It's a that's why I don't even like calling it a monitoring program. It should be an information program. It should be a kick-ass action program. It should be name your outcome programs. You follow me? And then maybe we would be doing this alignment better. So we're going to go through some of these, but there's not an integration. The monitoring program is an ad hoc thing to your organization. It's this fun thing you go do, but it's not really integrated with your organization, no matter who you are, as some integral part of what you do. We're going to talk about this one, the purpose data user one. A lot of times we as groups advocate our power. We think our job is just to get it, and it's somebody else's job to do the dirty work, to do action with it. And the Clean Water Act and all that is really, really great. It's really, really slow. It's very bureaucratic. But sometimes the best work we can do is right there on the ground, and we don't need a single government agency to be stewards and clean up that water, if that makes sense. So a lot of times we're actually focusing on the wrong decision maker. We haven't thought about it. We just think we should or we're obligated to. So we advocate a lot of our power by who we actually decide to work with. Everyone knows this one's a big one, data management. We don't evaluate our programs, and agencies are guilty of this as well. I'm not going to talk about this one, but if anybody wants to, this is another off-ramp we often do, is we actually are monitoring to change behavior. And at some point, it doesn't matter how much monitoring you do. Monitoring data doesn't change behavior. You have to actually change what you do. And there's a whole thing about that. And then another thing is we don't often really deliver. We don't really have a communication plan that we can evaluate. It's not just answering the question. It's now what do we do with it. So this is a deeper look at why we fail. or how we can improve. Go ahead. Thanks, Danielle. And it's all through having an effective plan. And what I'm about to teach you doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you're monitoring. It doesn't matter what indicators you're doing. And it doesn't matter what your data use is or your data purpose. This is universal. These are like best management practices. I don't care if you're shutting down leaky pipes, if you're just doing visual observations, or you're doing compliance monitoring, the whole other end of the scale. What I'm teaching you is like these questions you would ask. And all of you have a study design. You just don't know it. You just haven't documented. You all have one, and you might be missing key elements. But everyone, when you go out, even when you go, you have a study design. I just want you to realize, find those pieces to it. Okay, thanks, Danielle. So what is an effective monitoring program? It's going to produce measurable results that are trackable and identifiable. Trackable, identifiable outputs, results, outcomes, and impacts. And if you don't know the difference between outputs and those things, that's another class, but you should. These are the beans. How many stations? How many bottles? How many trains? This is something different, and there's short-term, long-term, all in here. But you can measure and track and identify those. And if you can't do that right now, that's the place to start. These are the essential building blocks for an effective monitoring plan. There's this whole idea of having an active study design, meaning you're always changing it. Quality assurance, data management, deliver information, evaluation, and then if you are working with volunteers, and most of you are, raise your hand if you work with volunteers. So half the room does. I stick this in here, not everybody does, but if you do, replace this with you work with staff. Maybe that's worse. But you work with people to get it through. But there's a whole other set of best management practices that Danielle's going to cover later around volunteer management, program management. So let's talk about, I'm going to spend most of my time here today. Go ahead. Study design. That doesn't mean all study designs are equal. I'm not saying that. The amount of rigor, you guys get that if you're doing compliance monitoring, you have to have a pretty rigorous monitoring program. You got it? Compared to if all you're doing is teaching fourth graders how to collect temperature. But you still have a study design. The duration, the resources you need, the complexity, the formality. Do I need to write it up? If I'm going to go out and shut a pipe down, do I need to have a full 20-page thing that Barb says I need to have? No. But you still have a study design. So the formality is not necessary in there. But if you're trying to get funding and get relationships with state agencies and do more, you need probably more of a formal document you can show people so they know what you're doing and what you're not doing. And then the quality level. There's no such thing as bad data out there to me. It's just tell me about that data and I will use it for the appropriate thing. I don't need a 20-page study design document to measure the pH in my fish tank. If my fish is dead, I need to do something and go buy fish. You follow me? We all get into we got to have a clap. No. What's the right everything? These questions, right? The right everything for what you're doing. Okay? I just want to make that point then. So what we usually do is we have some sort of expectation. You're a great example. Just have an expectation. We all have an expectation of rivers. Think about your expectation, or your lake or your ocean. I would like it to be clean, safe. My family can go there, not killing me when I drink it, blah, blah, blah. Then we go out and we monitor what's going on. Go ahead. And then how does what is here now compare to what my expectation is? You can put your question right there. And then we decide, oh, it's not up to par. I need to restore, it's impaired. Or we decide, hey, this is really good. I maybe need to, it's high quality, I need to protect it. You follow me? This is basically what we all kind of ad hoc, I call it a spit bath assessment. This is kind of what we do. You guys know what a spit bath is? It's a full-on shower. We call this, typically this is what most people do in the monitoring design. You know, they're just like, here's my question, I'm going to get equipment, so I'm going to go out and do it, and they're really not doing this piece that I'm going to really emphasize. Can you find yourself up here? And you're willing to shake your head? Okay, go ahead, Danielle. Another stab at this is what we often do is we say, well, we have our monitoring question here, and when we go out and monitor, we need to be able to discern between what's really going on versus what's natural. This is getting harder and harder to do because of climate change and things. But we want an accurate understanding of what's happening that's not, natural variability. And then we want to take an action. Or we want someone else to do something. Go ahead, Danielle. And so we can control that so we get our expectation. And we'll call that a study design or a monitoring plan, which is kind of just another way to look at it. Does that make sense? Okay, go ahead, Danielle. But here's what's wrong or confusing about some of those things that I encourage you to do. Is we'll say, well, I want to know my monitoring question is I want to know if rivers are healthy. The Clean Water Act asks that. But the Clean Water Act actually defines what healthy is. What is healthy? Healthy to you is not healthy to you, is not healthy to you, is not healthy to those people in the webinar. And people don't like to define things. But if you don't define it for what you're looking for, you can't measure it and say you got there or you didn't get there. So there's all these ambiguous terms in our monitoring questions, in our study purpose, that I actually ask you to define. And you don't have to be right. You're just movement towards that. And then when you evaluate, if you evaluate, you keep refining, well, health means this now. Well, health, a lot of times healthy might mean the Clean Water Act definition of healthy. But these are very ambiguous terms. Restored is really, those of you in restoration get it. If we restored some of our rivers in Colorado to what they were in the 1800s, they would not be trout fisheries. They'd be blown out braided systems. If you know where Colorado Springs is, Fountain Creek is a great example of that. So do we want to restore to that? No, people want that trout fishery. So these are very, very important, especially the more people that you are involving to understand. They need to know what you're calling, what you're not. And we're afraid to define things. Get my point? Okay, next. At best, we do this. I'm going to skip this. I mean, how many of you have, you feel like your data management is like this, or you don't evaluate, or you don't share your data? If you do have effective study design, you don't look like this. Maybe the person you assigned this to looks like this. Anyway, go ahead. I think a lot of volunteer monitoring programs happen when really good-looking, awesome people get together over beer, and then they get a great idea. And that's not a study design, but it could be. Okay, go ahead. So this is my new sort of visual of this, is that when you align all these different continuums, and we're going to go deeper into this, and if you keep following on your handout, actually that's not quite on there, but we're getting there. If you line up where you are on all these, you actually create a data pathway. So briefly, let's talk about this continuum of study purposes. Remember I had you fill out a column, study purposes? Are you doing condition trend? Are you doing impact? I'm going to define these a little bit in a bit. Effective monitoring, do you have a project and you want to know if the project worked or not? Maybe you're doing use support. There's a continuum of uses, purposes. Anybody not agree with that? Willing to challenge me? There's a continuum of management decisions. This is a little nuanced, but it's management decisions. You can do use support, and it can be educational. You can do use support, and it can be community inquiry. You can do use support, it can be used for advocacy or planning. This is where the 305B and Clean Water Act can fall in. To regulatory, follow me? Same data can be used. You can have use support and take data here and here. And then there's this continuum of users. Hit the button. Both of them. We could be targeting youth, adult, target marina owners, farmers. This is the level that information needs are needed, and information products, this continuum. You're trying to collect data and answer these questions for these people, and they have different information needs, and we don't ask what they are often. And then there's this continuum of results and outcomes and impacts. Do you want to change behavior? Do you want to have a regulation? Do you want to close a beach? Do you want to know if my uses are met, the river's healthy? There's an economic. I want to revitalize the river to bring economic. Maybe it's a social, environmental justice issue. There's a whole range of things you could have as an outcome, right? So in my program, so this is my old slideshow. I fixed this actually, but for the Riverwatch program I started 2 years ago, we actually do condition trend. We do baseline monitoring. Baseline monitoring is condition trend. And it really actually also falls under use support because we use the Clean Water Act, so it's both. So I could have an arrow here and an arrow here, and that goes to the state government because we give our data to the Clean Water Act process. And it actually, uses are met and regulations, so I would have two things. I want you to see how if you take one of your question and you would draw one data pathway. We have like 8 of these. But you're designing your study to do this data pathway, this information flow. Does that make sense? Check ahead, too. No? Any questions on that? We're going to go deeper into this. This is just one way to illustrate it.
Barb, okay. I think it's important to bring up, too, that when you go through this process and make these decisions, you don't have to have blinders on, but you now have a path and guidance. And that allows you to set expectations for your partners, for your staff, for your volunteers. Say, this is what this project's for.
I'm on F in your handout, and those are the 4 continuums I'm going to go deeper into. Yes?
So what if,
At the bottom down there.
what if you think of your monitoring program and you make that line, but it has 2 distinct paths?
It's just another, so you're actually dicing out, you're sort of refining, this is my question, and here's all the different ways. It ends up being, like I said, I have 8 or 9 of them. And for each one of those, I'm going through this process that I'm taking you through. So I actually come up with this whole list of information products, information needs, that then I go back and my technical design, which is what I do, where I do, when I do it, is all driven by that. It's all driven by that. So I absolutely, then I'm setting myself up for something to measure. So you're going to have multiple ones. I'm just having you do one here today to get the idea, okay? So let's talk about that first continuum of purposes. And I like this view of it better, but these are, and I haven't actually found people who are studying monitoring water that they can't find themselves on here. And you might be doing multiple of these. So condition and trend investigation is like that baseline. You're just doing stuff over time. Okay, that's the purpose of your monitoring. Impact is you're going to discover, is that plant contaminating the river? Is that mine dump? You know, is this field of agriculture? You know, that's impact. What's the impact? And sometimes you want to break it down. You're actually studying non-point sources or point sources. You can break that down more as a point. Then effectiveness investigation. You've done a restoration project. You've done a cleanup. You've done something. You've changed behaviors. People stopped doing X, Y, Z, and it didn't work. All of these have a different study design. All these have a different technical design, where you go, when you go, what you do. And there might be overlap. Make sense? Use support is, this can be formal. Clean Water Act is formal. It can be informal. Informal, an example is the neighborhood kids go swimming at the local pond every summer, and they know not to go swimming when it looks like X. And then when it looks and feels like that, they'll go swimming. Native communities do this all the time. They're very picky, all their uses and values. They don't have a formal system to know when and to do what. It's informal. You follow me? And it can be that. This has a continuum. Any questions? Anybody not find themselves here somewhere with the question you asked today? And again, it can be in multiple places. No? Okay. Sorry, we have to go fast in 90 minutes. Now, the second continuum is management decisions or uses. Go ahead, Danielle. That's up here. Looking a little deeper at that continuum. And there's an inherent rigor in this one. I could do any one of these purposes for education or community inquiry. This is where the Clean Water Act comes in. Community or agency advocacy or planning. It might be local government. It might be federal government. It might be a district. And then regulatory legal is things like compliance, enforcement monitoring, that end of the scale that is being used. So that continuum, purpose lines up with the use, and then you get the third continuum. I'm giving you an example up here of my program. The third continuum is you plug in the different users you're going to, for the combination of these two that you're going to work with, or that you're trying to address. So for our program, if you put them all up there, Danielle, because I'm not clicking them in there. So we do, no, not quite that fast. We do Clean Water Act. Our data goes to Clean Water Act. That's use support. But for the volunteers, we're trying to teach them about the use and the health. And for the health department, we give them raw data to put in their assessments. And then the watershed groups are part of our volunteers. They want to use it for the local watershed planning. Now, can you see that even though these are the same, that the information these three users need might be really, really different? These guys don't want raw data. They want us to analyze it and give. These guys want raw data. That's an information product. Raw data is an information product. They just want, because they combine it with all the other data, and they do their assessment. These guys sometimes want a little bit of mix. They want the raw data and. But I understand what they need so now I can deliver that and measure that delivery. We also do, 319 uses our program a lot because they can use our program as a match. So we help groups do this, and then that can lead to TMDLs. It can lead to other stuff. They use our bug data to ground truth their macroinvertebrate MMIs. That's a regulatory thing. Same, for me, it's the same study design. My what, when, where, my technical design is identical to fill all of these. And these would be multiple lines on that arrow graph I have. Does that make sense? Okay. So now we're going to go to the fourth continuum a little deeper. Go ahead. Well, I wanted to stop here and say, who are your users? Who are your decision makers? And again, put a plug in. Maybe it's just you and your constituents and your board. Maybe it's you and the community you live in and the farmers you're trying to work with. It doesn't have to be, but you have to figure out who they all are so that you're making them happy and you actually have a data pathway to deliver them something. So this is a place a lot of people don't spend a lot of time thinking about who are my users and what information do they need. I spent a lot of time on this part of the study design because this is what we don't do. Okay, go ahead, Danielle. I took that one out. Go ahead. Mouse slide. So now there's this result, outcome, impact continuum. And the question you want to ask is that so what question. If I answer that question that you write down, what exactly do I want to have happen? Short-term, long-term, what income, what outcome, what do I want to have happen? Be really honest. Because there's a relationship between what you want to have happen and who you're actually targeting. I cannot tell you the number of times groups I've worked with this, that the light bulb went on and said, why? Oh my God, why are we bothering with them? I have no idea why we're trying to impact them. That's not who we need to be impacting and working with them when they went through this exercise. Because somebody told them to, because they inherited it. Who knows why? They're not actually focusing on their target of influence. So that's the question you want to ask, so what? So what if I go to them? Can they really do this? Okay, thanks. So back to here, I just went in a little deeper in these continuums. And again, you can draw a line for all of it, but it becomes a data pathway, an information pathway, if that makes sense. Okay? Go ahead. So how does this, what are information needs? In the workbook, there is this worksheet. In fact, it might even be on here. It is, on page, it's letter I. Is an example of this chart, another version of this chart in the workbook on the webinar. These are the kinds of information question needs. If you do not know what your user needs, this is what you ask them. Things like, what decision are they going to make? And what do they need to consider politically, historically, culturally to make that decision that maybe you haven't thought about? What key indicators do they need, not what you think they need? Ask them, what do they need? Where do they need it from? That's the where. These are these sort of technical design questions. What are their benchmarks and references? And if you don't know, then you get to make it up. It's another place we lose. Get an advisory committee. Find people who do know. We actually just mimic. Our data gets used by the health department 99% because we're doing the very same methods they are. How can they not use it? All I have to do is prove that we're using those same methods. What methods are they using in the field, in the lab? What's the data quality? You get asking these questions, and sometimes they don't know because they didn't write it down. It's not like health departments or Clean Water Act agencies write everything down very well, too. But you get a sense of what the information needs, questions you're asking. That's what this worksheet's about. And you would do it for every monitoring question and every one of the decision makers you're trying to impact. So that you actually can create information products that meet that need, then you have something to measure and you can deliver it. Make sense? Oh, come on, somebody shake your head. You know they're shaking it on the webinar. Thank you, webinar people. Okay. So, this is another way to look at what I call the sort of information cycle of products. Does your user want raw data? We often don't even count that as a valuable asset that we're giving away. Do they want raw data? In my program, they do. I think you can click. This is what my volunteer monitors want. They want me to analyze it. We analyze it the same way the health department analyzes it. So we just tell the story with their data, just their data. We don't combine it with everybody else's data. But maybe your audience wants it interpreted. This is a big leap for people. Volunteer monitoring groups don't like to do this Because analysis, in my definition, is things anybody can do. It's calculating statistics and maxes and means and graphs, and anyone can do this. But to go from here to here means, oh, you're putting your story on it. And there, in the workbook, there's a bunch of tips on how to do that. You just give assumptions based on, usually, in what the data doesn't tell. Like, here's what I can say about this, and here's what I can't say about this. Here's what we learned, and here's what we still don't know, and that's evaluating in a way, and you go back and adjust your monitoring design. Maybe your group wants a recommendation. You're actually going to the city council to say, we need X, Y, Z. But what do they need? So you're actually mapping out your information product. By the way, in information products can be report cards, a website, a GIS map, a storyboard. All of those things are information products. It's endless. Okay. Go ahead. So how do we turn this into a study? What does it look like with study design? These are my objectives today, and we actually just did that. We're on this how to do the study design. So back to this bullet here. How do we turn all this thing I'm talking about into an actual study design? Go ahead. So this is how I break it down. And there's lumpers and splitters out there. You probably know what you are. But to teach something, you've got to sort of split it out, and then you lump it back together. So this is what I felt has worked in working with hundreds of groups across the country. Is what I spend most of my time up here in the program design, and I actually call it people design. And then this is the what, how, when, why, where, the data quality. Keep going, Danielle, because actually we don't always document and do all of these things because this planning is up front. We like to get out there and start sampling and then come back and say, what the heck is our design? So the program design is the who and the what and the why and where you find out your information needs. Can you see now why I say that this should drive everything else? But we often start here at the technical design. You agree with me? And it's fine. It's fine. Just go back. Just stop. Take the time. Planning means, I wish I could document this. I think for anyone who doesn't do this right here, they actually waste money down here. They're spending all that time. They're not using my data. Why don't they do this? Why don't, I don't know what this means. I'm generating all this data. I'm not getting funding. You're not using it. They spend that time down here not actually being effective or making a difference. And they don't get it to the back up here. So this is the what, when, how, data quality, and this is where I put raw data management, getting your raw data to a verified form in a repository that you can use now for a gazillion information products. Then this is your information design, how you're designing all these information things you're going to give. This is where all your data visualization is, and this is where in your data management plan you have a management plan to manage the data for those information products. Very different than managing your raw data. Updating a report card, a website, a statistical tool is really different than managing the raw data from its birth to the death. And we don't separate that out because most of us don't even do data management. And then evaluation. Do you actually take the time to say, I answered that question in my 2-year study, and here's what I got, and then tell that success story? No, you're overwhelmed with, oh my God, here's what I didn't learn. Now I got to keep going, and I don't have time. We don't tell our success. We don't evaluate. Not just this evaluation thing gets confused with. But I evaluate my meters, and I have my QA plan. I'm not talking about evaluating technical. I'm talking about evaluating this whole design, like that data path flow. That's how you get to measurable results. Is you're actually stopping to say, yeah, we did that. We did that. We answered that question. We actually delivered that to so-and-so, and they did this with it, or they didn't do that with it. That's your evaluation. That's a success story right there. Go ahead. So I spend a lot of time in this program design, who and why. My new presentation had this figured out, but this is where I stick volunteer management. It's the who. Who's doing all of this? And this is stuff you're used to. I'm not going to go into this two-part scope and inventory. Where are you going? Is there existing data? Keep going, Danielle. But I want to say that volunteer monitoring programs should be in service of the data objectives and not the other way around, even if you started the other way around. If you want to have measurable results. And that will also greatly affect your retention and recruitment, if you can do that, because then people really know, if you're communicating, that they're making a difference. But here is that continuum of study purpose. Here's the continuum of the management decisions that you're identifying in this module. Here is where you're doing your users and their information needs and doing these worksheets. All in this first phase. And then at the end of all of these modules, I always have brainstorm, now do a capacity and prioritization check. Does it align with our, because you come up with a lot of ideas, but now what can we really do? What's real? And your budget, and is it scalable? And I have some really neat tools that help you communicate what you're doing and not doing. In fact, it's in the back of your handout. I call it an information blueprint. For every monitoring question, you can hand out to somebody. What we also don't do is tell people we don't do. One of the reasons my program is really successful is I'm really clear about what we do and what we don't do. That's how I tell the USGS when they tell me my data is not like their data. I'm like, yeah, because I'm not asking the same question. I don't need the same level of QA. I'm not going to 0.00000 significant digit. So I'm actually, okay, here's what I'm not doing. You see how that's very powerful? To communicate that, to know that? Anyway, that is the who and the why. So all of that drives the what, and I'm not spending much time on this, but because it's what you guys know. What do you monitor? Where do you go? When do you go? How do you feel the data quality objectives? This is where sub-documents come in, like your CAP. Most of you probably don't do SOPs, and I have a whole SOP manual on how I manage my volunteers.
Barb, can you just explain the acronym?
Yes, thank you. Standard operating plan, quality assurance project plan. Thank you. Because I'm leaving in a year, and I want to leave my legacy. I don't want to be that gal. So is your data management happens in this stage, and you want to know if we often talk about camp 1, 2, 3. If your data is in filing cabinet, it's not organized, it's not an asset, and it's not making a difference. And most of us do data management as an afterthought. Agree? Because we have to. So did I. I started my program, and we didn't even have laptops. Dedicated bag of paper. And I have a SQL Server Relational Web Services database now. This is if you have your data organized in Excel or something, but you're not really sharing it. So it's not an asset, you're not using it as your potential. And then this is where you actually might be sharing it, but not to its potential. It's not going to a data portal or a hub or going beyond what you meant it to go to, so it can be used more than once so that you turn it into an asset. All that happens in that phase. So there's some worksheets in that technical design. The slide wouldn't come out, but it's actually good. This is an exercise where you just actually map your data, what you're generating. This is like metadata, field data, bug data, metals data, whatever it is you're generating. Map it from its birth. Is it coming through an app? Is it a field data sheet? All the way to its data repository and all the things that need to happen to it. And you got to map all the metadata too, because that is what makes your data an asset. Then you get to the information design. You actually design the information products. It's how you're going to do the information products that your group needs, how you're going to analyze and summarize, how you're going to interpret and conclude if that's what you need to do, how you're going to communicate and deliver. We teach a whole class on this. Danielle does an excellent job on this. How are you actually going to communicate and deliver that to those users? That's actually a fine art of its own. Then how do you manage the data for those information projects? Who's going to do this task? And then there's always that capacity building in there. So you get the information design? Yes, somebody said, yes.
Yes.
The web people are screaming, I can hear them. Then after you've mapped that to birth to death, this is sort of a larger data management plan. And this is where you manage your raw data. How do you take this raw data through this process? How do you deliver it? And how do you evaluate it? Now you have something to actually measure and tell a story about. This all happens in the information design. Make your data as an asset. It's an asset if it can be found, publishable, discoverable, if people know what it's about. State agencies don't do a really good job of this. They demand it of us. When we put data in the portal, they won't use it if we don't give it all this metadata, but they don't have time to put their own metadata in there. So then that can feel like a double standard. The Monitor Council is kind of up on the bar on what we need to use your data more than once. And it needs to be format friendly, machine readable, not in an Excel spreadsheet. Go ahead. I call that creating a forever song. And we don't have enough time, but when Jay-Z was interviewed by David Letterman, he was talking about every musician dreams to create a forever song, a song that people listen to for decades. And Happy Birthday is a classic example, but you can pick your artist and think, wow, that's what I want our data set to be, is a forever song, to be used over and over and over. Go ahead. Go ahead. Because you don't know. I want you to think bigger. We can't be everywhere all the time, and you have no idea who's going to use your data. And my famous story is Butterbeer on the Adams River, Gold King spill. It was our program. We monitored it. We have 20 years of data on this river, plus from our program. The EPA used our data to determine if the river had come back. Because everybody else's data was upstream right by the mine. This is 50 miles downstream. We didn't plan on that, but because we had baseline data, it happened. And because we get our data to the portal, we get it to all these places, it's an asset for people. You don't know, but you need to know that we have to start doing this because we can't solve the problems we have today. Go ahead. Then finally, the red is all the things we don't do well. This is actually have an evaluation design that's bigger and greater than I'm evaluating my volunteer's experience. I'm evaluating my lab's performance. I'm evaluating my pH meter. I'm talking bigger here. It's both and. How did you actually monitor your question? How did you answer it? And how are you going to tell that story? This is the whole plan, not just the pieces of it. How do you capture that and tell that story? People will hear me over and over. We do not capture that story. Yeah, I don't remember. And then how you to communicate this plan. How do you tell people this is what we're doing and this is what we're not doing? That is incredible credibility for your funders, but also those data, those decision makers, you want to use your data. And then who do you acknowledge? So that's all in the workbook in the evaluation section. Go ahead. So that's your plan. And all these components you planned for, all these building blocks, you follow me? You plan for it and then you implement it. Go ahead, Danielle. Go ahead. So I've just taught you the role of study design. How do you go from asking a monitoring question to the ROIs? The 4 design elements. You can program, shut them out, technical, information, and evaluation. Role of data management versus information products. You guys are doing great. I'm shouting at you, I know, because I'm so excited about this stuff. And then the role of the program in your evaluation. This is what I wanted to share with you. Go ahead. So then this gets confusion between implementation and planning. That plan can take 6 months, because that's why I do this over 6 months, is because you might need to bring in your board or your constituent or an advisory committee to answer some of those questions if you're just starting and you want to bring them in. And then you might need to bring in a technical person to do that. So it can take a lot of time, or not a lot of time, but a lot of people, and you want to have that time. Can you go back, please? Is that where I was? Oh, it's right here. Okay. So in your handout, in your workbook here, you have the next slide on page 8, if your page is numbered. Now go to the next slide. So the Water Data Collaborative, you can go to their site and learn more about them. I don't have time to tell, but this is this is their framework that they're working on. If any of you went to that talk. Here, they have 7 steps. And I just want to, you see these kind of implementation frameworks. Step 1, you don't even need to see the detail, but it's in your handout, page 8, or letter P. Here's the study design. Here's the plan. Step 1 is the plan. Step 2 is let's go collect the data. Let's go out and have fun and have pizza and go collect. Step 3 is I'm going to manage my data and get it in a repository. I'm going to get it stored somewhere so everyone can use it. That's these green arrows. That's implementation. And then this is the whole information design. All this brown bubble here is the whole information design. I'm going to share it to a portal. I'm going to make it API, machine readable to API services and send it out to all my group's websites. I'm going to data visualize it, all of these things, visualize it, and I'm going to take it to action. This is all the information design. And I'm going to create an outcome and an impact and an action and a result. And then the last one down here goes back to evaluation. So there's the plan, I implement it, I evaluate it, I come back and I adjust the plan, then I go back out. Does that kind of make that you could be creating a plan while you're going out? And you want to think about evaluating a plan that makes a sense to you at what frequency. If you're doing baseline monitoring and you're in it for 20 years, maybe you don't evaluate it, I don't know, every 2 years, every 3 years. If you're doing more responsive stuff and you're doing like the swim guide, you probably need to evaluate it every season, maybe monthly, to make sure you're actually closing the right beaches and those kinds of things. This frequency, that rigor, remember, can vary. But we don't. How many of you think you evaluate your whole program? Raise your hand. I love you guys. And I love that about you, because you're going to start doing it now. But you actually probably do. But you kind of probably do it ad hoc or on the fly, right? You guys are good. So I'm saying, you have a study design. Don't you think you have a study design? But you might be missing some components that might make it better. Do you agree? Then you better get going. You are way behind.
I mean, sometimes your study design is in your head, right? And you just got to get it on paper.
All right. Go ahead. One of the things the Data Collaborative is working on is a way to bring this training in an online. Have you guys ever done an online training course, like an online? What you do have in a handout out here, I'm going to hand out, is I've developed and I'm working on, and we're all working on a very detailed evaluation of all of these steps. So you'd enter this platform we're dreaming up. You'd enter it with this evaluation, and it would tell you the pieces that you need. So maybe you answer it, and it spits out that you need a co-op. No, you need to really think about your geographic scope, a particular step in a thing. It'll tell you that, and it'll ship you over to one of the modules that you can go through an online, pretty interactive worksheets, videos kind of course. This is basically, module 1 is basically the why, what, technical design, information design, evaluation. And there's a whole module on program, volunteer monitoring, on managing volunteer monitors. So that would be the different modules that would spit you out to. And if you went through one, you would actually maybe come out with a monitoring plan, maybe a QAP, maybe a data management plan. These are some products that would come out of it. And there'll be like this sort of certificate of completion. You can take all the time you want to do it, because there's a really great platform out there to do this kind of stuff. And then we want to start collecting these documents and have a repository like NEMI. NEMI, for those, is the National Environmental Monitoring Inventory, the .org. It's the National Monitoring Council's product of all the methods that are out there. And we should be getting our methods in there, and we can. You can just go there and put our methods in there. But you can go there and find, what if you had a place to go, I want to look at what everybody else's costs were. Gosh, if they had the same monitoring question, I could start with that and then adapt it to mine. Would that be valuable? Yeah. This is kind of what we're talking about, and it's kind of a self-paced deal. We've culled all the study designs out there, pulled the information, the best of. We're not reinventing these wheels. The best management practice. So it's not telling you what to do. It's saying, go answer this question. So you could come out with a very short monitoring plan or a very complex one, depending on you, and go back to it. So we're working on this kind of concept that we all kind of feel like, gosh, there's no one, this is not out there. Where do I go find a co-op? Where could I go find an example? And we will be doing things like the co-op now. The EPA has their new monster monitoring design co-op tutorial. We'd be accessing that. We've done this inventory of regional resources, and we've inventoried all the state agencies to find out how they support volunteer monitoring groups. Maybe they have an equipment rental. And if it'll identify who you are, and it'll serve up those resources to you if it's the right question and resources. So we're actually connecting to all of these other resources out there, because there's enough of the national groups involved. Anyway, this is a concept that's coming, and if you want, there's a handout back there. So more on the Water Data Collaborative and 4 webinars that they're giving in the nearest few months on topics like study design. If you go back to that framework, they're doing a portal on the whole information, sort of all those information products. There's on each different. You can read it.
Could I make a plug for NEMI again? Because this is one of those things, NEMI, NEMI.org, right? The idea is that I do not think there are enough volunteer protocols, if any, in there right now. However, that is the standard for us. People go to that environmental methods index, put your information in there, and if you don't know how to do it, or you're like, I want to do it, but I don't know what to do, just contact one of us and we'll get you there. Because I think there's power in being able to say, volunteer monitoring program X, well, where's your scope of work, or what's your SOP? And be like, well, it's NEMI blah, 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 right? You're already there. You're speaking their language.
There's no bad method out there. It's just, is it the right method for the question you're trying to answer? Maybe there's a couple bad monitors out there. But I don't know about bad methods. Do you follow me? I mean, there really isn't. And part of our job is to communicate to the biases of the regulators who want to use the data. They need to understand that there's this whole other area that we are impactful in that isn't necessarily regulatory, that helps them do their job. If you guys are out there if we're on the ground cleaning up watersheds and water bodies before they ever get to that point, aren't we actually helping EPA do their job? We should tell them we're doing that. Tell that success story, and then they help us get resources to continue. You follow me? We don't do that very well. And EPA is doing an amazing job based on the NACEP report to try to figure out how to bridge top down, bottom up. We're both responsible for that. I keep looking at you because you're the only EPA person here, and I'm from Region 8, but I love Region 8 because I'm from Region 8. Okay, we're good. I think I'm almost done, wrapping up here. So one of my last slides here, in addition to resources, this slide is actually on the back of your workbook. This is another way to visualize what you do. And by the way, you can do this whole study design thing with other people's data. Some of you might not actually collect data, but you get other people's data, and you want that information from them. What question did they ask? What quality of data did they have? You have to take it through the same process. This is an example. The classic cog and wheel analogy is just pretend this is your watershed or your state, whatever scale you work at. Maybe it's your county. And this is what everyone's doing their own thing. And nobody really knows what everybody else is doing, or they don't really care. They're kind of scattered on the left of the dotted line. But this could be your own program. Maybe this is your fecal coliform program, and this is your 4-H program, and this is something else you do. And what you want to do is have the cog and wheel, you want to have all your wheels on one axis and know why. So it's okay if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, but you know where they overlap. Maybe they overlap in audience. But you want it in the watershed, this is what I do all the time, is I can show in the watershed, people say, well, don't go there, everyone else is going there. I said, but who else is doing stewardship and education? So when I dip that bottle in, I'm impacting you, and you're not, so I'm going to stay. Why don't you use my data? But I can, or maybe not. Maybe it's a legal thing and they can't trust anybody, so they do that. But we know why we're both there and why it's different. Does that make sense? We're in this kind of relationship, the cog and the wheel. So this could be your own program. This could be in the watershed. This could be with a partner. This is a really good exercise to think about where I fit. If you go through this study design, you can start to do things like this. Tell this story. This is just a graph, a table that says, I'm going to list all my stations. And now I'm going to tell all the assessment types. Do you remember that chart with the purpose and the uses? Each and a user, remember that chart? Each one of those is an assessment type, a unique assessment type. And I had like 4 of them up there. I had the volunteers, the health department, remember that, the watershed group? You can start to say, this station is serving all those assessment types. This station is only serving 1 of 3 of them. So when my boss comes in and says, you got to cut your program, you got to cut the station, I can say, well, if you do that, you're impacting all of these outcomes. You follow me? You can start to make these graphs like, oh, here's another one, these tables. This is by parameter. I'm going to do bugs, and the bug program we have fits all these assessment types, addressing all these users and all the information, products, and outcomes that go with those. But gosh, E. coli is only working on 3 of them. So the lab shuts down that's doing E. coli, I know exactly what ones are impacted, and I can communicate that to my boss, my funders, and say, we got to find another lab, cost went up. Go ahead. So this is by indicator. This is by information product. I'm sending raw data to these users, but not those. I've got to do the same report I'm going to write to my farmers, to the laymen, it's the farmers, it's the teachers, it's okay, so it's got to have that right kind of voice. This is just by information product. Go ahead. This is by benchmark, or by standard. I'm using the bug IDI for all of them. I'm using a standard sediment, and for this one, we're going to use the standard sediment for the health department. We're going to modify it a little bit for XYZ. So you see the power starting to communicate. See this overlap of your own program to get your own cog and wheel in order? Okay. This is actually by assessment type and source. You can look at it later. It's probably too complicated for right now. Go ahead. So in your packet, there is on page 9, I believe, thanks to Danielle, she listed a bunch of resources.
And the links work.
And the links work, so you even check that. The Water Data Collaborative is on there as well. If you go to page 10, there's the learning objectives for this workshop, but then there's a filled out kind of purpose use assessment type kind of. This is just all for your information if it's helpful. If you keep turning, this is what I call the information blueprint, page 11. This is what I make an FAQ. This is like a fact sheet for every one of our monitoring objectives. If you look at the information on there, it covers every part of the study design, the people, the program, the technical, the information, and the evaluation. It also has a budget, definition for ambiguous terms down there, number 15. This is like a little FAQ that tells people what I'm doing around the organizing unit there is your monitoring question. Just a tool. The cog in the wheel, and some other questions you can ask yourself. And then what I do have up here, and I'll hand out when Danielle goes, it's just kind of a bullet list of those, the linear, the splitting of all the steps inside the, if you're the lumper, you just want to look at those 4 buckets. If you're the splitter, you want to see all the steps, because this is a handout that's just, and the evaluation, a version of the evaluation. And I go pretty into detail about it. It's not, do I have a clap? It's yes, do I have a clap or not? Then I ask, well, is it relevant? Are people using it? And where does it live? Do you know where it lives? If you don't know where it lives, probably not one of the other two. So it really goes into a deeper of how valuable is it. Maybe you don't need one of these things. So I'll pass these around. So thank you for your time. Sorry that was fast given the time. We are going to jump to some best management practices in volunteer management, and managing a volunteer program, because we said we would do that in the webinar. Or in the.
I need to just get to.
So while she's doing that, do you have any questions, any comments? Also, if you sign this, help you.
So I wanted to go through real quick some key points that I both hopefully will inspire you to consider working with volunteers or community scientists, as well as maybe give you that information you need to go back to your agency or your boss and say, this is really good information to have. Here's a justification for why we should work with volunteers. And I want to give you a little bit of a discussion on assessing your audience for your information product. So I want to say, first and foremost, America's pastime is volunteering. If you look at these stats on the bottom, 63 million volunteers within the U.S., donating 8 billion hours, roughly $200 billion annually. So let's think about this, right? This is a workforce for us. When we start talking about the fact that our streams are, 20, 30% assessed, we don't know what's going on with the other 70 or 80% of our streams. There's a really good justification to try to get more people out there. And there is a large percentage of those volunteers that want to spend their time outdoors. So how do we get them? How do we engage them? Right? So this is something that was an aha moment for me, and I want to share with y'all. This idea that everybody's first engagement now is through a screen, like it or not. You check the weather before you go on your phone, before you go outside. You check your Facebook feed before you get out of bed, right? Kids are, on their screens constantly, and there's this tendency to want to put the screens away and go outside. But what I'm saying right now is you need to be able to have both. If you want to be able to engage folks that aren't graying out, we'll say, of your program, you need to realize that people are engaging through the screen. Once you do that, that's the first exposure. So even if you have something, say, for the wildlife management areas, where it's like, show us your love for the wildlife management area. Hashtag, I love my wildlife management area. Even something like that, telling people to get to take a photo, is something that's going to make a connection. They're going to be connected with you. That first taste that I talk about, that might be 5 minutes taking a photo, right? The change of heart is when people say, hey, you know what? Like, well, what else can I do? I have time. And that change of heart happens when they have contact with you and they see what you're doing with that information. And then finally, that big contribution, either, getting folks involved and either, stepping them up, and they're either donating time, donating money, donating resources, but now they're contributing, and they're an important piece of your program. So just very quickly, I wanted to share the demographics of volunteers. You have 29% Generation Xers, they call them. I guess I may fit in that category. I shouldn't date myself. Then there's the millennials at about 22%. This other category, who do you think this other category is? They're retirees.
All the good-looking people.
All the good-looking people. It's the baby boomers right now. Okay? The highest volunteer rate of any age group. 3 out of every 10 baby boomers is volunteering their time for something. Why not it be you? Right? This idea of, here's what they want, though, which is different from volunteers in the past. They want challenging assignments, things like strategic planning, volunteer management, coordination and marketing. They want to take the skill sets that they had from their jobs at the offices or what they're comfortable with. They want to be able to apply that to what you're doing. And I would say that, and we all know this, a good quality volunteer monitoring program isn't just working with volunteers to actually gather the water samples. You have volunteers helping you with every single component of that. So I wanted to share real quick this idea that you have 2 different types of programs. I know that we're agency heavy right now, or that we do a lot of work with agencies in this room. So think about the volunteers. There's volunteers that collect and submit data, collect and submit sample, I should say, to an agency, right? They collect the sample, they take the grab sample, they go over to the agency. That is one type of monitoring. Or they go over to your organization. They drop the sample off, and you run the IDEX, I don't know, in the shed. Don't cringe to it, people. It's true. But then think about this. You also have volunteers that collect the samples and analyze them themselves. Right? These are the people that are out there on the ground collecting the macroinvertebrate samples, counting the macroinvertebrate sample, and sorting it right there, counting it, putting it on a data sheet, throwing all those macros back in the stream because we don't want to kill every single macro in the world. But the idea here is that these volunteers are spending more time, and they're doing the analysis piece too, right there. So when you're talking to folks, you have to think about who those potential data users are and what their uses are, right? So as far as a group collecting the data, that's a data user. You should all have a data use. Data user could be your community, local government, it could be the state or federal government. And I know Barb mentioned this a lot, but the monitoring, the questions for monitoring that drives that monitoring program, I want to say our questions for monitoring, you need to think about those as to what kind of information products you want to put out there, right? Because if you're most concerned about getting a water body listed as a high quality water, are you going to give like an index card that says this, with an infographic on it that says this water is high quality, like hashtag high quality water Sunnybrook? Or are you going to actually give some different type of information product? You're going to give a different type of information product. So your group wants to know, is it safe to swim at a lake? Or if fracking and the activities in the area are impacting your local stream? Think about your goals and objectives, right? So your goal is going to be Where do you want to go? Well, I want to learn more about the water quality in Stonington Harbor, or I want my kids to swim in Deep Lake. What are your objectives? They are specific and measurable. Your objectives are going to be to collect these types of samples to reduce bacteria in Deep Lake to meet standards. Those are tangible items, right? And then you're going to constantly need to revise as needed, reflect on those successes, because we don't do enough of that. We don't take the time to actually say, oh, that worked, that was great. Or, I have a really good program. So an example of this, and I'm sorry this slide is messy, but this is out of the Chesapeake Monitoring Cooperative Initiative that's going on. And what this is we sat down with what we thought were the data users, data consumers, people that need lots of data. We went to the states, we went to the volunteers, we said, what kind of information do we have? And put that on the map. What kind of information do we want? And we sat there with giant maps with both parties and figured out what we needed and what we wanted. From there, we were able to hone in and prioritize on what parameters we wanted to do and where it needs to be conducted. This area was did not have enough freshwater samples. They say conductivity anywhere in Untitled. Well, that makes sense. Agricultural watersheds for pesticides. Well, pesticides, that is out of the realm of most volunteers, right? So go back to the state. Well, how do you want to do that? You want us to like grab a sample and take it to you? It's not your responsibility to figure that out if you're in a collaborative. It's the group's responsibility to figure that out. And when you're working with your local partners, your local government, your state government, if someone really wants pesticide data, they're going to figure out how to help you guys get it. You need to take ownership over your own data. I recognize that this slide may be a little dated, but not by much. This was a coworker's office at my former state job, I'll say.
They found him in the back corner.
They found him in the back corner. This was for data solicitation for the Clean Water Act. You have to put out a data call, and all the data would just come in any format. I am not kidding. So data. So if you want to do Clean Water Act requirement work, right, you need to recognize that just sending it to this guy may not be the best use of your data. You need another use as well. So reporting out on data, taking that data and turning into a story, having a communication plan, the grandmother test, knowing your audience, and data to action. So here's what I say, first and foremost, when it talks about stories. When you put up a slide of trying to stress that the dissolved oxygen is really bad in an area, what is going to make more sense? What is going to be more like a tug? Is it going to be a fish kill, just a picture of a fish kill, or is it going to be an Excel sheet that says DO is 0.3? What is the immediate? Put the fish up and talk about the DO. That's what gets people engaged. People don't want to be squinting. And something that drives me crazy when people say, I have all this, they have all this graphic information. They have graphs, they have Excel, everything on the screen. They're like, well, I know you can't see it, but and I'm like, well, why'd you give it to me? Put it in a damn handout. You know, I mean, how many of you have heard that already? Amen. Okay. So the grandmother test. My grandmother, sharp, funny, wonderful woman, and I would read her my documents, my calls to volunteers. Hey, Grandma, do you know what I want people to do? Here's what I'm asking them to do. Hey, Grandma, this is what we found in the river. Do you understand what I'm saying? Right? It's not an insult to call it the grandmother test, because if you can get it past my 90-year-old grandmother, you're communicating properly across multiple generations. So think about that. When you're working on your information product, find someone, not in your typical choir, that you can have a conversation with to ask if your information product is working. So the communication planning. You need to think about a communication plan. I will say there's a study design plan, right? There should also be a communication plan. And you need to look at how you're going to be making sure that you're consistent with all of your messaging through your written word, your spoken word, your electronic, social media, publications. You're going to call your program Water Watch. Call it Water Watch in everything. Right? If you keep that common lexicon that Barb was saying, make sure that you're consistent with everything. What do you want to accomplish out of this communication plan? Do you want people to give you more money? Do you want a behavior change within the community? Do you want people to stop littering along, the creek? What is the goal? What is that audience, and how are you going to evaluate that program effectiveness? So thinking about those audiences, and I'm sure you know this, but here are some key ones. I think a lot of people leave this community out here, this kayaking, boating community, the angler community. And what I can say with my experience in working at a hook and bullet club, a large one, is that it doesn't matter what side of the table you are on. So I had this volunteer, his name was Ernie, and he would have his gun permit, so he would have his gun on his hip. We'd be in the middle of a stream in, outside of Washington, D.C., right? Not intimidating at all. And we would be in the stream doing the collection, and afterwards, and he would go through the macroinvertebrates, he would do it all, and afterwards he would say, those pharmaceuticals in the water, that is a damn liberal conspiracy. I'd say, right on, Ernie, but you drank the water because you're with me, right? He was there. He didn't care. He wasn't trying to get my goat, right? He cares about the stream. Just leave it at that. Put your political differences aside. Get in the stream together. Get outside together. Language. Think about your language. Back to the grandmother test. Will your audience be able to define watershed, the term watershed? Maybe not. Maybe you need to say land and water. I was giving a talk to the municipal officials in New Jersey. 500 plus mayors are in the room. And I say, how many of you know what a watershed? Every single hand goes up. I say, how many of you live in a watershed? 30% of the room goes up. Got it. Right on. Right? Which audience will know the meaning of nutrient pollution? Right? This is what you have to think of when you're using these terms. Erin, you might remember this. I don't know if you remember this, but this is just real quick. And for folks of you on the webinar, take a look at this slide. Bureaucrats' favorite words. I will say that folks that non-bureaucrats too, in the NGO community that work in the bureaucratic world, use these words all the time too. Right now, for 10 seconds, 15 seconds, go ahead and see how many words you can get in a sentence. Go ahead. So the other thing is to ignore that jargon. Try to stay away from that jargon. Here's what I want to say, and I know that we're a few minutes over, but I want to just add, bureaucrats' favorite words. We are here to develop an implementation plan with your stakeholders to prioritize issues, to figure out your resources, strategic collaborative efforts that are ensuring the stability of your best management practices. Therefore, the river will be protected. What the hell are we talking about? Right? The other thing is jargon. Jargon comes off as being pretentious. It's exclusive. You want to be inclusive. right? So think about those words that you're using. You want to build the confidence of your team, build the confidence of the people that you're working with. Make sure that you can use language that they can repeat back at their kitchen table, at home, after they leave your training. So last two slides I just want to share is the data sharing tools. If you look at this, this is a survey from 2012. There were about 100 people that responded. And the data sharing tools, annual reports, online databases, results and brochures, right? Smartphone apps. I would argue that this hasn't changed very much. People put their data on a website, they're like, we're done. You're not. It's not giving you any information. Finally, we're doing a significant disservice if we are not sharing our data, sharing it with each other or the water quality portal, meaning publishing your data, getting it out there in another format for other people to use, for that forever song, and then telling stories. Again, a bad DO rating, the number, a bunch of fish dead, people react. But the idea here is that we have to get out of our silos, right? That's it. I'm going to stop there. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you. You guys get